All right, let's jump right in with a deep dive into Exodus chapter 16. We're going to uncover some really interesting stuff about God's provision and purpose.
Oh, yeah, sounds good.
So we've got the Israelites, they're fresh out of Egypt.
Yeah.
They just witnessed this incredible miracle at the Red Sea.
Right?
They're standing on the edge of the Sinai Desert, and things aren't exactly going smoothly. It's about 30 days in, and, well, that honeymoon phase is definitely over.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that even like the timing here has symbolic meaning. They arrive at the edge of the desert on the 15th day of the month.
Oh, okay.
And get this, 15 spelled out in Hebrew, it's Yah, which is like a shortened version of God's name.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
I never even caught that before. Like, even in the middle of nowhere, it's like God is leaving little breadcrumbs. It's amazing. But the Israelites aren't exactly seeing those divine breadcrumbs, are they?
Well, put yourself in their shoes, right? You've just seen the Red Sea split, which is like the ultimate power move, but now you're facing this vast desert. It just seems totally barren. So fear and doubt start creeping in, and, suddenly those Egyptian leeks and garlic, they don't sound so bad after all, even though, they were slaves.
It's amazing how quickly we forget the big picture when our stomachs start rumbling, right?
Yeah.
So what happens next? What does God do in response to, let's just say, their less than grateful attitude?
So they start grumbling and complaining.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they're like, oh, remember the good old days back in Egypt?
You've got to be kidding. Freedom, fresh air. Apparently that wasn't enough. It's kind of like, what were they really craving, Was it just the food, or was there something deeper there?
Yeah, it really shows that very human tendency, like even today, to focus on what we lack instead of trusting in a bigger plan. We get so caught up in the details, we forget about the one who holds the entire masterpiece.
Mm-hmm.
But you know what? God doesn't, smack them down. He doesn't punish them for their lack of faith. He actually responds with this amazing promise,
Okay.
bread from heaven.
Whoa, talk about a divine delivery service. So is this where the manna comes in? Oh, okay. But I always thought, manna in Hebrew meant, what is it? Because, they didn't know what this stuff was.
Right, that's a common misunderstanding.
Yeah.
The Hebrew word man can mean what, but in this context, it's actually referring to this miraculous food.
Oh.
It's described as, coriander seed,
Okay.
white in color, and it tastes like honey cakes. Every morning, it would appear on the ground like dew, just ready for them to gather.
Honey cakes in the desert.
Yeah.
That doesn't sound too bad. It's almost like a little preview of the promised land.
Yeah.
Because, it's always described as flowing with milk and honey.
You're totally right. The manna wasn't just about keeping them alive. It was a symbol, a foreshadowing of the abundance they would find in Canaan. And it wasn't just dropped haphazardly either.
Oh, okay.
God gave very specific instructions on how to gather it.
Okay.
Each person was to gather an omer per person.
An omer, what is that?
It's like an ancient Hebrew unit of measurement. It's basically about 2 quarts, and it represented their daily portion. It was enough for each person to be satisfied. But here's the thing. If people tried to hoard extra, take more than they needed,
Yeah.
They didn't have any extra. And those who gathered less, they never came up short.
Wow, that's incredible. It speaks to how meticulous God is and how he provides for everyone.
Right.
No need to hoard or compete or anything, just perfect provision. What a great lesson in contentment and trusting in God's abundance.
Yes.
But wasn't there something about gathering a double portion on the 6th day?
Yes, that's right.
What was that all about?
It has to do with Shabbat, the Sabbath.
Okay, yeah.
God told them to gather twice as much manna on the 6th day because the next day was supposed to be a day of rest, a day set apart for worship and reflection.
So it wasn't just about filling their bellies, right?
Right.
It was about this rhythm of work and rest and trusting that God would provide even when they weren't actively striving and working for it. It's such a great concept, and it still applies even today.
Absolutely. And it also emphasizes the importance of obedience. Some people tried to outsmart God by hoarding manna.
Oh, no.
Yeah, they were thinking, I'll skip gathering tomorrow, but you know what happened?
I bet it didn't end too well.
No, it didn't. The manna they saved, it rotted and it bred worms. Pretty clear sign that you can't stockpile God's blessing.
Yeah, you can't manipulate it. No.
But those who trusted God's instructions and gathered only what they needed, they experienced God's faithfulness in a powerful way.
So it's a reminder that God's instructions aren't just arbitrary rules. It's about positioning ourselves to receive his blessings.
Yeah.
It's about being in sync with his rhythm, his timing,
Right.
his provision. So we've got the grumbling, the miraculous provision, and this powerful object lesson in obedience. Is there anything else we can learn from this chapter?
Well, there's this other fascinating detail. It was a command to preserve 2 quarts of manna for future generations.
2 quarts. Wow. Wow, they weren't starting a museum of desert snacks, were they? Why would they need to do that?
It wasn't just about preserving a physical object. It was about preserving a memory. It was like this testament to God's faithfulness in the wilderness. These jars of manna would serve as this, tangible reminder, like a visual aid for their faith journey, something to pass down through generations.
Oh, I see. So it's not just about surviving in the moment. It's about building a legacy of faith for the future, reminding ourselves and future generations that God is faithful, even in the middle of the wilderness. That's amazing. I never thought of it like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like taking a snapshot of God's goodness and tucking it away, for a rainy day. And those manna moments, those tangible reminders, those can be so powerful.
Absolutely. It's like we get so caught up in the day-to-day and we forget all the incredible ways that God has come through for us. But when we actually stop and we remember those moments, it can totally change our perspective. It's like those memories become fuel for our faith, especially when we're going through hard times.
It really is. It's like you're creating this spiritual scrapbook, and it's filled with like snapshots of God's grace and provision. And just like if you were looking through a photo album, it brings back all those feelings and memories. When we revisit those manna moments, it can really reignite our faith. It reminds us that we're not alone out there in the wilderness.
That is such a good analogy. And it's interesting, the Israelites, they weren't just wandering in the wilderness for a weekend, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they were out there for 40 years.
Yeah.
Eating manna every single day.
It's true. And, the number 40, that's so significant. You see it over and over again in the Bible. Like Noah's flood, 40 days and 40 nights. Moses up on Mount Sinai, 40 days. And even Jesus fasting in the wilderness, 40 days.
It's almost like this divine timer,
Yeah.
It's a period of testing, preparation, transformation. So for the Israelites, those 40 years out there, it represents a period of really depending on God, learning to trust him. And it's like they're being refined for this purpose that God has planned for them.
Exactly. It's not just about getting from point A to point B.
Yeah.
It's about the entire journey. What are you learning? What's happening to your character? And how are you becoming more dependent on God? And that manna, that daily bread from heaven, it was this constant reminder that he was with them every step of the way. And he was providing not just physical food, but spiritual nourishment too.
So it wasn't just about filling their stomachs. It was about shaping their hearts, teaching them to rely on him, to trust his timing and his provision. It's so easy to read these stories and think, oh, well, that was nice for them, but what does it have to do with me? How do we take this ancient story and actually apply it to our lives today? What are some of the big takeaways from Exodus 16 that we can really use?
Well, I think one of the first things is it really challenges us to see God's provision, even if it comes in a way that we don't expect. I mean, I'm sure the Israelites were thinking they'd get something a little bit more substantial, a little bit more glamorous than coriander seeds.
Yeah, I can just imagine their faces when they first saw that stuff. They were probably hoping for, like giant roasted quail or something like that. And instead, they got this weird flaky stuff that they've never seen before.
It's a good reminder that God's ways, they're not our ways.
Right.
And the way he provides for us, it might not be what we expect. It's not always going to be flashy or something you'd put on Instagram, but it's always exactly what we need in the right amount at the right time.
And it's not always going to be like a dramatic one-time miracle either. Sometimes it's this daily consistent supply, just like the manna. We have to learn to trust him in the ordinary, everyday things, not just in those big crisis moments.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's like realizing every breath, every sunrise, every meal, it's all a gift from him. It's about cultivating a heart that's truly grateful and can see his provision in all the little things.
Yes, that's so good. And this chapter also emphasizes obedience, doesn't it?
It does.
The Israelites who hoarded the manna or went out gathering on the Sabbath, they totally missed out on the fullness of what God wanted to bless them with.
Yeah. And, obedience, it's not about blindly following the rules.
Oh, yeah.
It's about lining up with what God desires for us, trusting that he knows what's best, even when we don't get it.
So it's not about following the rules. It's about following the one who made them.
Exactly.
And he has our best interests in mind. He's not trying to restrict us. He's trying to protect us, to guide us towards that abundant life he has in store for us. And sometimes that means letting go of what we want and surrendering to his plan, even when it doesn't make sense to us.
Yeah.
Right.
It's about saying, not my will, but yours be done. Just like Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane. We have to trust that His ways are higher than our ways. His thoughts are higher than ours. Sometimes I think we can be like those Israelites. We're grumbling and complaining instead of trusting in God's provision and plan.
Mm-hmm.
We get so focused on what we don't have that we miss all the abundance he's already given us.
So true.
It's about changing our perspective. Instead of thinking about what's missing, what if we focused on God's faithfulness? Even in the wilderness, God provided for the Israelites. He can do the same for us today.
It's like that quote, what if you woke up today with only the things you thanked God for yesterday? That would really change things. Okay, we've talked about provision, obedience, trust. What about the whole preserving the manna for future generations? What can we learn from that?
That part really emphasizes remembering. It's about intentionally being grateful. Those jars of manna, they weren't just a museum exhibit. It was like, hey, future generations, this is what God did. Don't forget it. Don't take it for granted. Remember his faithfulness and let it fuel your own journey.
And those memories, those manna moments, can be so powerful for us too. It's a reminder of how God's come through in the past. It gives us hope and courage for whatever we face next. And I think so many people have a hard time remembering the good things. It's like we focus on the negative stuff. But if we make a choice to actually think about those manna moments, write them down, share them with others, that can be a game changer.
It really can. It's like we're training our spiritual muscles to see God working, even in the normal, everyday things. It's about shifting our focus from what we lack to what we've been given, from our worries to his faithfulness.
Yeah, it's like we're building this fortress
Right.
made of gratitude, brick by brick, memory by memory.
Yeah.
And then when the storms hit, when we start to doubt God or his provision, we can look back at those manna moments and remember, he's always been faithful. He hasn't abandoned us. He never will. So as we wrap up our deep dive into Exodus 16, I want to leave you with a little something to think about this week.
Oh, okay.
Are you ready for it? What are some of your manna moments? Those times when God showed up in an unexpected way, or answered a prayer, or just gave you strength when you needed it most.
That's a really good question to think about. Taking some time to just sit and reflect on those times, that can really change how we see things. And it fills our hearts with gratitude, too.
It really does. And don't just let those memories fade away. Write them down in a journal, make a visual reminder, or even just tell somebody you trust about them. It's about really cultivating a heart that remembers and celebrates those moments.
It is. It's like building that spiritual scrapbook we were talking about before.
Exactly.
It's a way to really hold on to those moments where we saw God's goodness.
That's good. And, let's face it, we all go through those wilderness seasons.
We do.
Times when we feel lost, confused, overwhelmed. But Exodus 16 reminds us that even in those times, God is still working, even when we can't see the whole picture. It's about clinging to that truth, that he's with us every step of the way, guiding us, sustaining us, and ultimately leading us to the promised land. And maybe, just maybe, if we learn to trust him more deeply, to obey his guidance, and to really remember his faithfulness, we'll start to see those manna moments all around us, even in the most ordinary things.
It's about training our eyes to see his hand at work,
Yeah.
training our hearts to really appreciate his goodness, and letting our lives reflect his glory.
So as we head into this week, let's hold on to this truth.
Okay.
God is faithful, he does provide, and he is always working for our good.
Yes, he is. Let's remember his goodness, be thankful for his provision, and trust in his incredible love.
That's so good. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into Exodus chapter 16. Until next time, keep diving deep.